What's up, nerds? Meeting Papi here. Papi's Kitchen, episode 5, part 2. So, what we have for you tonight is an interview, a big interview with Big Steve. So pumped to have Big Steve on the show. Awesome, dude. I was just fucking amped to have him on the show. He's a great guy. Super interesting, super cool. But unfortunately, my internet completely got fucked within like a couple minutes of having him on. So that was frustrating. I was kind of present for the first like half of the interview. Couldn't see, couldn't hear. Like whenever I talked, it was just like butting into like someone else already talking, which I couldn't really tell because I was lagging. But nonetheless, we get some interesting content. I think. I mean, you know, me and you, the viewer, know that I'm the real genius behind the show, right? Without me, my guys are useless, right? Adam the Jew, LK, Pat, they're all drips. Without me to guide everyone through this whole process. Come on, right? So I don't even know what they asked. I didn't even listen to it back. But you're gonna find out. So yeah. Just want to say a big thank you to Adam. You're an awesome dude. You're a great guy. Wasn't cool of Kirk to talk about DMs. I think that's kind of lame. Anyways, Adam, love you, great guy. LK, another great guy. Pat, another great guy. Yeah. So check it out. Enjoy. All right, welcome to Papi's Kitchen. This is week 5, episode 5. We got our biggest guest yet. We're here with Big Steve. Thanks a lot for joining us, Steve.
Hey, not a problem, guys. Huge fan of Papi's Kitchen. I'll say that again so you guys can get it on record.
Yes.
Hell yeah. Well, you picked a good show. So, Adam, LK, Pat, how are we doing today?
Pretty good. Excellent.
Pretty good. Great. Excited to be here.
Oh, yeah. Right. So I think the only other appearance that you've done, Steve, is Mincel Boys, right?
Yeah, I was on the Mincel Intel. Honestly, I haven't been invited on very many other shows except for Australian Brian Riccio keeps trying to do a peace summit with me, but he can go fuck himself.
Yeah, he can fuck right off. I'm glad you took my advice, though.
I've never been invited.
Sorry, let's try back up. Go ahead, Steve.
I said I've never been invited on Mike and the Minifans, so.
I know. What's up with that?
That's slime ball.
I don't know. I guess I'm just not big enough. But what do you guys got going on today?
So, with that said, that you haven't really done many appearances, I would love to kind of talk a little bit about you. I don't want to ask too many like show related questions. A little bit about S.E. Robinson, the man himself. So one of the biggest parts that I enjoyed about going to Madawaska was kind of learning the history of the area, learning about the Acadian people versus the Quebecois and all that stuff, and Stacy's family and all that stuff. So are you born and raised in Dexter?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Dexter, and I think I don't really know too much about like my ancestors, but I'm pretty sure it's just English people who made their way up from Massachusetts and settled in Maine. So I think my ancestors on my dad's side have been in Maine for maybe 5 or 6 generations, and a little bit less than that on my mom's side. So just like pasty white English people in Maine. I think there might be a little bit of French Canadian in my ancestry, but I'm not sure. One of my great grandfathers was adopted, so there's kind of a blank spot in our family tree.
So there is a chance you're Jewish.
So at least
there could be a chance. There could be a chance.
Or of German descent. One of those two.
Yes. Not mutually exclusive, but yeah.
True.
I mean I could do the Elizabeth Warren thing and just pretend that I'm Native American or some other marginalized community. And force
164th, Steve.
Yeah, 164th. But so far, I've not been too curious about my ancestry, believe it or not.
All right.
I agree with you. I mean, I had one from like the 70s. It pretty much says I'm a mutt.
So,
It's not going to say anything
interesting.
else.
But it's been at least 5 or 6 generations.
Yeah, in Maine, as far as I know. I mean, again, I haven't like researched it thoroughly. As far as I know, I just like lived in Maine for a long time. But I did back when I was working with Howie Carr. We reached out to one of these DNA test companies to see if we could get free DNA tests, so we could make fun of Elizabeth Warren and all take the test. And there was a company out of the United Kingdom that took us up on it, and they all sent us free DNA tests, and we did that. And it was mostly English. I think I had some Finnish in me or something like that. So all good pure white blood.
All right. Some would say blue blood, right?
Happy to hear it. Happy to hear it. So yeah, we got 5 or 6 generations, in Maine. What was it like? What was it like growing up there? Did you leave Maine a lot? Did you get to like go? I know you went to Bangalore to do things. Did you leave Maine decently often, or not really?
Yeah.
No,
Papi, I think we're losing you.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
saying
Papi.
he's on a little bit of a delay. So I didn't really leave Maine a lot. I mean, we didn't like my family wasn't. I don't think we were poor by rural Maine standards, but we also weren't incredibly well off. So it's not like we were taking vacations, to Florida and everything. Visited relatives in California a few times, but when we went to Boston, I mean, like that was like a big like life event getting out of Maine. So I mean, we didn't really travel that much. I would say. Until the time I was like 18 and went to college, 99.99% of my life was lived in, like a 10-mile radius of Dexter. It was a small town, and there was a lot of stuff for us to do, a lot of trouble to get into, go out in the woods and hit squirrels with sticks and stuff.
That kind of surprises me, Steve, because you seem so worldly, so knowledgeable. So
I appreciate you saying that. A lot of people are saying that.
I was about to say, I've got a brother too, and an older brother, and who grew up together. And he's always giving me his hand-me-down BB guns and shit. You got any good stories? Driving around shooting up some squirrels in the woods.
I mean, I'd have to look at what the statute of limitations is, but
7 years most. I think everything but murder.
I think my friends and I have we may have taken a few deer that it wasn't necessarily entirely legal, but nothing too crazy. I mean, yeah, we played with guns and stuff, but everybody made it out alive, so it wasn't anything too extreme.
And you all got your fingers.
Yes.
Adam can barely
Unlike
open
Adam.
things.
Yeah, I mean, unlike me. I was actually it's in relation to this, I was listening to Erica Nardini's podcast the other day, and she was had her mom on, and they were talking about how they look for people who are don't necessarily come from the blue blood Harvard type of background, that they want people who are hardworking. And Kirk always talks about how you are the best colleague he's had. Forget just producer, but colleague, and that you have a work ethic that at this point in your life isn't really teachable. Do you think that the way you grew up, and like you said, you weren't poor, but you weren't well off either? Do you think that you saw how hard your family worked, or was there anyone else who you saw as a role model? And do you think that helped instill the work ethic that you have in you?
No, I think I really just built it myself. I really think my work ethic is completely self-made. The moment that it happened was I was actually on and off. I worked on my uncle's dairy farm in St. Albans, Maine, just like milking cows. It was a great experience for me because I remember actually one particular moment. It was one morning where like a cow shit on my shoulder and like my wrist hurt and like a cow had kicked me, and it was just a miserable experience. And I was like, this is why I'm going to finish college. I'm going to try and do as good as I can. And I'm going to like get myself into that nice, comfortable, like white collar knowledge employee role. So I never have to do manual labor just to survive. So anytime I'm working, like, if it's like late at night and I'm like, oh, fuck, I still got to edit this Cullen episode, or I still got to, go listen to this shitty podcast and pull some sound from it or something. I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, well, it could be worse. I could be waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go milk cows, which is not like a
shout out Sheldon.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's nothing bad about it. I mean, it's an incredibly peaceful lifestyle, and it definitely has its benefits. But I was like, man, a couple of summers doing the dairy farmer life is really enough for me. I want to just sit behind a microphone and edit sound and stuff. It's a much more comfortable existence. I think there's always, I guess, knowing what if you don't work your ass off, knowing what you have to fall back on, milking cows, that provides a strong incentive to continue working your ass off.
Yeah, but I think it's also nice to put stuff in perspective, right?
Yeah, no, it definitely helps keep everything in perspective. But I think it also, hard work has its own rewards. When I think people can recognize it. A lot of stuff we do is behind the scenes, but I think most people recognize, the Cullen is a good recent example. The Cullen episode. I mean, I think people can just listen to that and tell how much time was spent editing the audio for that, and I think people appreciate it, and that's worth something to me.
So how old were you when you were working on the dairy farm? Like when you kind of made that realization that you wanted to kind of leave that environment?
Yeah, so that would be like 18, 19, because it was I did a little bit before, I think before my freshman year of college, and then the breaks in between, like fall break or something, I'd come back and I'd work a little bit. And I think the summer between my freshman and sophomore year was where I spent like that entire summer doing the morning and evening milking.
So at that point, did you kind of know that you wanted to go into politics and kind of along the whole political, part of you? Like, where did that kind of start from? Who taught you about politics when you were young? Like, how did you get into that? Was there somebody in your family that you talked about politics a lot with, or?
No, I mean, not particularly. I don't think either of my parents were very political. They probably skewed conservative. I think my first memory of voting is when my parents actually voted for Angus King in his first gubernatorial election. Or maybe it was his second gubernatorial election. It'd probably make more sense if I remember it being his second one. But so, I mean, they weren't explicitly conservative or right wing. I think I used to drive around listening to Howie Carr with my dad for sure. But when I got to college, I wasn't like explicitly political. And what happened was after I decided not to play football my sophomore year, I ended up writing an op-ed. I ended up writing an op-ed for the Bowdoin Orient, and it was just kind of a one-off thing because I joined the College Republicans. I joined a bunch of different groups because I was like, oh, if I'm not spending 35 hours a week going to football practice and games, I got to find something productive to do with my time. And so I wrote an op-ed for the student newspaper. I really liked it. It got a good response. You could probably still go find it in the Orient archives. I think maybe somebody already has. I think it was
Warden of the North has it.
Yeah, it was one that was like, coming out as a conservative at Bowdoin College or something ridiculous like that. But I started writing that column pretty regularly, and it was, I don't want to say controversial, but kind of an unusual thing to be an outspoken conservative on a college campus. And it's like during the Obama era, so everybody is just uniformly liberal, like, yeah, go Obama, this is progress, hope, change, whatever. It was like all of the campus was united, just loving Barack Obama. Yeah, and I'm here writing these fucking. Yeah, I was just writing these dick columns about how multi-generational welfare dependency is ruining America, and reverse racism and affirmative action is hurting African American students, and just basically picking like whatever third rail was out there on a college campus and just grabbing right a hold of it and just being like, "Fuck you guys."
So, Steve, that's a good topic, because one of my questions is, what do you think about the current state of higher education? Like, do you think most of the colleges have a liberal focus, and how do we address that?
Yeah, no, I think that all the colleges, like any dissenting voice at colleges, in the both on the administrative side and as professors, have been virtually wiped out. Some of it's been just through natural selection because conservative academic ideas don't get the kind of support, they don't get the reviews that they need. Some of it's been natural, but some of it's also been very deliberate in pushing out the views that they don't want. Because I think in the 60s, 70s, 80s, academic culture kind of had this idea that they could exert more influence over culture and over politics by basically brainwashing people. So a lot of it's been just kind of a natural evolution based on the incentives that have been set up. And a lot of it's been a very deliberate move by, I guess, extreme leftists within the academic community. I mean, the liberalism, the left-wing ideology just dominates college campuses at the academic level. But then you also have the bureaucratic structure that's been built on top of that. And I'm talking about, the dean of diversity, the dean of student affairs, the dean of this, the dean of that. They've got this huge, I mean, like if you look at the amount of money, the operations budget of your average college, it's so much of it over the last 30 years is going towards bureaucrats. Yep. When the educational experience for students has actually gotten worse in a lot of ways. If you think about it, like nothing about the educational process is better now than it was 30 or 40 years ago, just from a purely academic standpoint. But the price that you're paying is inflated sometimes 200, 300%.
Well, it's getting worse because it keeps getting easy, right? And people are lazy, and they feed off of this laziness, and say it's the best thing ever. You know?
There was a moment I remember at I was going into a like an intro to stats class or something at Bowdoin, and someone had found the 1908 entry test to get into the mathematics program there, and it was like a 1-page test, and it was pinned up on the wall, and like this was what college freshmen had to complete just to get into the math program there. And I looked at it, and it looked like fucking Egyptian hieroglyphics. I didn't even know the first thing about it. I couldn't even take 2 steps towards trying to solve it. But college freshmen 100 years ago were like required to just know that to get into the door at the program. So I was like, man, how far back have we gone in terms of the academic excellence of our colleges? And I think I'll stop here, but I think the problem is that
I love it.
The ideology is that elite colleges like Bowdoin, like Harvard, like Bates, Colby, whatever, have become vehicles for the amelioration of social inequality as opposed to places where academic excellence is supposed to flourish and be encouraged. The priorities have taken a huge change in the last 50 years, and they now look at themselves as, agents of cultural change rather than as elevating the best of what humans can be and inculcating in people the values befitting free people.
And they also, though, are wiping out any push to have conversations. I mean, I remember, at this point, probably 15 years ago, when I was at Michigan, I at one point was protesting in favor of Israel, obviously, and I had a professor who was protesting against Israel, and we were literally face-to-face protesting against each other at the exact same time. An hour later, I was actually sitting in his class, and that was fine. It wasn't like problematic there. Whereas nowadays, I feel like that would actually cause problems for me within that class versus just an awkward moment in passing.
You always had to worry about it. I used to. There was a college professor at Bowdoin who I took I think one class with him, but he would respond to my column and op-eds in a student newspaper. And it's like, dude, you're a professor. I get that, you're a political guy, but don't you have like more grown-up things to do than to, rebut my opinions in the college newspaper? And don't get me wrong, I loved it. If the professor is having to respond to what I'm saying, I guess I struck a nerve. But
he was alerted by your writing talent, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. When you're sitting in that class though, and you're like, if I've got under his skin like this with a column, is it going to affect the way I'm being graded? You always had to wonder that. I really don't know.
Very much
the solution is not to go to college.
Yeah, I mean, I think
have to do it. I mean, it worked out. It's working out for me pretty well.
And I think also
now.
So I think what amazes me is as much as they defend diversity and for voices to be heard, they are the first one to shut down any dissenting voices, right? If you don't think like them, they don't want to talk about it, right? And start accusing you.
They don't want diversity of ideas. They want diversity of skin color. They want the barely even skin deep diversity because it satisfies their quotas. It makes them feel good. They can have, they're helping out marginalized communities against the white patriarchal oppressor. They can feel good and sleep at night. But in the end, what they're doing is just creating these little homogenized bubbles of people who don't learn to have their ideas challenged, don't learn to defend their ideas, and can't really think critically when they get out and try to get into the workforce.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think initially when you were finishing up school, I think you wanted to become a writer down in DC. I think you said that you had gotten some kind of family connection to a publisher down there, and that you initially had intended upon writing in DC. So what was it kind of like finishing up college? And I think Kirk's touched upon this before. It's take some balls to move to DC. Not really having connections and going down there. So what was it like kind of going down to DC? Right after college.
Yeah, I packed up my stuff and I got on a Greyhound bus from Waterville, Maine, and drove all the way down to Washington, D.C. And I remember I was waiting outside of the bus stop in D.C. waiting for one of my Bowdoin friends to come pick me up. And there was a Nigerian immigrant there who was waiting for his ride to go out. And I think he was going to his sister's wedding out in Columbus, Ohio or something. But he had some hobo wine and some Newport cigarettes. So I sat outside the Greyhound bus stop smoking a Newport cigarette and drinking hobo wine with this guy, kind of talking about our different paths that had led us there. And I was like, this is kind of crazy. I'm just out on my own for the very first time. But I was fortunate in that I had I'd been accepted into something called the Hertog Political Studies program. It was basically like a not like a master's program, but a 6-week study program based around George Washington University, organized by like a bunch of neoconservatives and people who were fans of Leon Strauss. And I guess that came with a stipend and free lodging there. So I basically had 6 weeks within that program where I was like learning and kind of continuing school. It was just like a intense political theory process. I had that base camp to go out and try and find a job. So there was like that little kind of safety zone for me for 6 weeks. And I used that time to do a bunch of job interviews and stuff. And one of them was with Regnery Publishing, which the senior editor there, Harry Crocker, was a family friend. And he's still there. I still correspond with him from time to time. And I was able to get a job there as a sales associate. And I was like the lowest paid person at the entire company. And I was like, what it sounds like, I was selling books. Like somebody would place an order for 35 books for some event, and Regnery does like Mark Stein's book.
Like Ann Coulter. Yeah.
They do, yeah, and they did a couple of Ann Coulters, Laura Ingrams, Michelle Malkins. They've got a bunch of conservative authors that they've been publishing, and they do like a history imprint. But they also, the parent company there was Eagle Publishing, and they also operated Human Events, which was a popular newspaper in Washington, D.C.
Right.
It was known as Reagan's favorite newspaper. And so just kind of being in the same office, I was able to just kind of submit, I guess, political reporting, and they would use some of it if it was good. And I got a couple of good stories out that ended up being on the Drudge Report and got like, tens of thousands of views and did really well. And so I kind of like parlayed that into doing, I guess, my next adventure, getting out of sales. Because believe it or not, book sales wasn't where I always wanted to be.
So how long were you in DC for overall?
I think less than 2 years. So after I was working at Regnery Publishing, I went and I did a little bit of work for Al Regnery, whose father founded Regnery Publishing, and it was just kind of like side consulting, writing talking points, going to meetings, being like his personal assistant. And then after the I guess after Obama's reelection, that work kind of petered out, and I was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go like find another job down here, or am I just going to go back to Maine? And there was an opportunity. Yeah, there was an opportunity waiting for me at the conservative or free market think tank in Maine, and I eventually went up and did that.
Okay, so it was kind of the change of administration and just kind of a change of the environment that you're like, all right, I'm going to go back to Maine.
It was also job stuff. Boston's expensive. DC is an incredibly expensive city, and I was paying $1,000 a month to live in a room that was like this big. Like actually probably my room was smaller than this control room I'm in right now. And the rent was crazy. I probably had like $200 in my savings account. I was just poor as shit and didn't know what I was going to do. So I just kind of like pulled the emergency plug and was like, all right, I'm headed back to Maine with my tail between my legs, really.
And lots of meatball sub wrappers on the floor.
Yeah, no, you guys think that's a joke. I was eating those meatball subs fucking every single day.
Do what you got to do, man.
Yeah. I mean,
So you went to Maine.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just say every once in a while I justify Chipotle because that could be two meals. Half the bowl for lunch and the other half of the bowl for dinner.
So you came back to Maine, you're doing some writing, you're doing some policy and stuff, and I think you said you started to do radio on the weekends. Is that right?
Yeah, I just did this very dry. I guess my first time hosting my own radio show was called Inside Maine on WGAN, and it was like actually I think I started off with like a 3-hour or a 4-hour program. And it was just like, every couple of weekends I'd do it. And I just did like what most people do when they're new to radio. I just stacked it up with guests. I did like,
Right.
Every different segment, I've got some kind of guest with an interview, and I don't have to like talk a lot myself or vamp because you're not getting any calls on a Saturday or a Sunday morning in Portland, Maine. So I just do a bunch of guests and I talk about like how Medicaid expansion policy under the Affordable Care Act is going to affect nursing homes in the state with like the director of the Maine Nursing Home Association or something like that. I mean, just very dry political stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're doing that, and then you fall into, or not fall into, you have that kind of famous event that you MC with what's the name, Altitude and Violet.
Yeah.
So at that point, yeah. So at that point, you basically thought you were going to be a writer. You were in the writing kind of lane, doing politics and all that stuff, and you MC an event, and that's when Howie Carr's wife kind of recognized you and reached out, right?
Yeah, I think I've told the story a couple of times, but it's just I think the GM at the station asked me to MC the event. It was like Ken and Mike had their 10-year anniversary of doing their morning show together, and so when they asked me to do it, I kind of, I mean, I don't know what they had in mind, but I really took it seriously, and I spent a lot of time, writing my jokes, and I knew, it was going to be like a conservative radio audience. And
were they funny?
Yeah, I mean, you've heard them. I fucking place laugh riot. I was the funniest from there. I was the only one who prepared my joke.
Yeah.
The only one
famous Katrina joke.
Governor Baldacci was a fucking dead stick. I don't know if I invited him to be a part of it. I can fucking tell a joke if life depended on it.
Who did you murder worse, Baldacci or Menners?
I killed Baldacci pretty hard. I think I was the hardest on Baldacci, and he was also the only one who slapped back at me privately. He after I was ripping into him, after he was done and I was kind of inviting him off, I shook hands with him and he leaned in and he was like, "I hope you can find some honest work someday." Well, look at me now.
You did.
There you go.
You did basically the next day, right? You got an offer to work for Howie Carr. So did that entail moving to Boston?
Yeah, I picked up everything and moved to Boston. My then girlfriend quit her job, and we took the whole thing down to Boston. We actually lived in Waltham for a little while.
Oh, really? Okay, so for some reason I thought you. I didn't know you had been in Boston that long. But you've been in Boston for a while now. So you had no experience at all with you had no experience at all with radio, any of that. I think you walked in, you learned kind of all of it on the fly. So yeah, I mean, moving onwards. So you did that for about 5 years, and I think you had mentioned that you kind of started to get a little bit bored with politics and all. So how did you first meet Kirk? I know it was something along the lines of Cullen, but like, how did you guys meet? Did you kind of reach out and be like, "Hey, I want to help you out with the story," or how did that kind of relationship start?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just started DMing on Twitter a little bit because we were both trying to advance along some of the same stories. I mean, I think we were united by our mutual loathing for the Boston Globe, and when he was starting to do the Cullen stuff was when I really started like tuning in regularly to listen to the show. And obviously, I wanted to know what they were working on so that I could, bring it over on Howie's show. And so we also, what I think it was though, was the, it wasn't just the Cullen stuff, because we would report on the Cullen stuff and play clips from their show. It was also the sexual assault allegations and cover up at the Boston Globe, because there were some things that he wasn't allowed to say on EEI or would get dumped on EEI. And so like he knew for a fact that this was that guy's name, but we were trying to like also kind of say stuff and push it out and like make the story part of it. So we just kind of corresponded about some of that stuff. And then when he went to I guess when he was off EEI and was doing this radio.com thing, he was looking for a producer, and we had a couple of phone calls. I think he was just kind of trying to see, what was available in the radio world. And I actually recommended Dave Cullinane to him. And so he initially did hire Dave. And then there was the whole Mueller report, Alan Dershowitz thing. And, we had a couple of conversations like about, unrelated stuff. I think I recommended some other producers to him. And then somewhere along the line, I was just like, yeah, I'm ready to do something new, ready to get out of conservative media. I think, well, not necessarily out of conservative media, but I think the biggest thing was that when you're doing that radio show, you're hooked in, you're glued to the board from 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock. So like every single day, 3 o'clock, 7 o'clock, you're going to be right there every single day. That's what you're doing, no matter what. And it became, I guess, a little bit repetitive for me, maybe. Whereas in this position, and not that I could have foreseen it when I took the job, but in this position, I could be like planning an ice fishing trip to Madawaska, putting together an episode of radio theater, organizing a fundraiser for a Minifan in need, recording in Medium Papi's kitchen. You never know exactly what you're going to be doing. So I guess the variety is a little bit more exciting here, but I was just like at a point where I was ready to jump ship. And I also can't lie that a big part of the allure was just Kirk. I mean, Kirk's dynamic personality, the unpredictability. You really never know you never know what he's going to do. You never know what he's going to do next. And so I thought that part of it was exciting and just like really trying something new.
Hey, Steve, where did you meet Cullinane? You said you recommended him to Kirk.
Yeah, so I knew Cullinane for a long time because when Howie first started doing his show, he was out of Barry Armstrong's studio. And for people who aren't radio people in Massachusetts, Barry Armstrong is a financial advisor, and he does the Financial Exchange as like a paid infomercial on WRKO, the same station that carries Howie's show. And so Cullinane was Barry Armstrong's producer for a long time. I love Barry. Barry's a great guy. I still talk with him from time to time. But Cullinane was his producer for the longest time before he left to go do a morning show in a different segment on WRKO. So I'd known him a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Steve, I not the same at all, but I had a similar path in the sense that I moved to New York City after college with the goal of, surprisingly, going to law school, becoming a lawyer, making all the big Jew money. So a year into law school, I had a great summer internship, and I was just not into it. I just didn't like it. Found a new career, took a couple of new jobs, and ended up loving the career I have now. And as you certainly know, in the Bible it says that a person should love their toil. I was wondering if you think that there is a very good aspect in the fact that you've had such a diverse experience, and that has helped get you to the point where you're comfortable being able to, like you said, no 2 days are alike in your current job. And so, do you think that all of the different jobs you've had and everything that you've done up until now has built you up to be able to thrive in this type of environment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's having more skills is better than having fewer skills. So I don't think it hurts. But I also think that I have like maybe a little bit of undiagnosed ADD, and I think I benefit from a job where there's like different things happening all the time, and there's multiple things that can command your attention at any given moment. So you don't have to like if I just had to sit down and do like spreadsheets, or if I had to do a 3-hour-long Zoom conference meeting with, consultants about something, if I had like a regular job, I think I'd be miserable. I really do. But, I think that I guess, it's what I was telling that the guy from that blog that interviewed me that wrote that soppy ass blog post. He was asking me what I think a producer's job is. And I think it's really just problem solving. Like there's like the pushing the buttons aspect of it and making sure that the audio is good, but there's also like there's new problems that pop up all the time. Like when we started, it was, okay, Kirk wants to start his show on this date, but we don't have a studio. How do we solve that problem? Okay, we've got a rented studio, but we want a permanent studio. We got to go out and find a lease for a space. Got to solve that problem. Okay, now we need to build out the space and get all the infrastructure in there so that we can record the show. All right, now Kirk wants to do a show in Madawaska. Here are all the problems I have here that I need to solve. Now Kirk wants to do the Wilbur show. All right, these are all the problems I have that I need to solve. So it's basically just like, every week, every day, new problems pop up, and you try and solve them to the best of your ability.
But the good thing is that you're someone who can thrive in controlled chaos, obviously, though.
Yeah, I think so. Up until this point, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so when you become like that, you become a little bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. But I think you kind of answered it yourself. I was going to say, besides the marketing, dealing with podcast Jesus, driving blind Mike around, and then the general social media, what would you say is like the most difficult day-to-day of aspect of producing the Kirk Minahan show?
Probably the most difficult is just being like when the mic is on and we're doing the show. It's like he's one of he's the biggest podcasting talent on the planet, and I'm sitting in the booth trying to keep up with him. So I mean that's hard. Yeah. You never know what to expect.
You have to plan for everything at every time, I imagine.
Yeah. So it's, I mean that's a little difficult. And then it's not fucking rocket science back here, but there are other things going on that take up some of your attention. But so yeah, I mean I think just trying to navigate that. I mean trying to keep up with the Minifans too is a lot. Like I know the Red on the rundown, they were going off on what a liar I am, and we had Red on the show today, and he was like, oh well, he misinterpreted the Mina ladies thread that one time and caused some drama, and it's like there's like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Minifans, and they're all on social media, and they're all DMing us, and they've all got their little dramas and beefs. So if I don't quite get like the Mina ladies versus this other group of people 100% right on the show, I'm sorry.
Well, and to your credit, Steve, you always answer to DMs, or like even like
Yes.
when you started the show,
Yes.
we DM'd a little bit, you know, on my personal account. You always
Never
got back
answer
to
mine.
me, you know. So
Have I not answered your DMs, Pat?
It's okay.
Well, DM me.
Check your email.
Did you send me a dick pic? Because that's
No,
how
God,
these
no.
guys
No,
get
just
their
check your
first
email.
treatment.
You're good.
Okay, and Adam both sent dick pics, and then they get the response every single time.
Listen, Kirk wanted proof that I'm Jewish. I'm just giving it to him.
I wore
Hey,
a doggo
Steve,
tie just
did
for you. I
you-
don't send it.
did you expect to be as much on there as you are, like being an integral part of the show, or when you started, you just thought you would be like producing the show?
Yeah, well, I mean, I expected some kind of on-air role. I mean, that's what I was used to. I mean, I'm sure Kirk listened a little bit to what I was doing with Howie before he was even interested in having me on. So I was pretty vocal on Howie's show, and we get in debates and everything. But I also knew that Kirk's approach to content is to take the people around him and turn them into characters, because certainly, I mean, Ken Laird and Curtis, they probably wouldn't be the I guess the personalities that they are without Kirk having done that. But I mean, honestly, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about what the future held. I was kind of just like, Kirk's a really dynamic personality, and I trust myself and my own skill set. So fuck it, let's go do what we're gonna do.
So in this team,
So how
three
long was-
part question here.
I'm going to cut you off. Okay, I'm going to go ahead first. So like when you're kind of
Well, you're cutting yourself out, man.
Okay,
when-
you're
when-
gonna have to go. Medium Poppy just cut himself out.
Yeah, you're cutting yourself out.
Try lowering the quality of your video.
Yeah, man, we can't hear you.
I'm just gonna
Drop
run
your video
this
down.
has never happened. I feel this
No.
has never happened before. Like,
You got a
fucking
question, Adam?
insane.
It's God punishing you for cutting me.
Intern Nick's
Okay, you want to ask your question in the meantime?
Yeah, so my question is like it's a three-part question. So what's your favorite content from KMS? How do you see the program shaping up in the future? And what kind of new content would you like to see?
I think some of my favorite content is the stuff that we just kind of like accidentally happen upon. Like, the Mamma Mia stuff last week was fun, and like, just kind of wandering into a fight with Mariah Carey's followers. I mean, that's kind of the fun stuff. I mean, some of the best, funniest segments that we do aren't really planned out. We just kind of like, we've been recording for 2 hours, and then I say something dumb, or Mike says something dumb, or a caller says something dumb, and we just kind of like wander into this great funny segment for a long time. And it's all on Kirk. I mean, Kirk sees it an opportunity
absolutely.
to create a segment and just kind of runs with it. I think those are some of my favorite segments. In terms of what I would like to see more of, I think I'd like to see coronavirus over with.
That would be great.
Coronavirus
That would be awesome.
One kind of like all-consuming topic that really just like it's fucking black hole that drowns out all the other news and all the other events that kind of produce like the fuel that churns the engines of the show. So I'd like that. So if the Minifans could just go solve coronavirus.
Solve Corona.
I mean, at least me and you, Steve, we don't have kids to deal with like the rest of the.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
That is true.
Very true.
That is true.
But I still have the producer's inclination to want to have big guests on. So I'd like to get I've been trying to get Joe Kennedy on the show. He's running for Senate here in Massachusetts. He needs young people to vote for him. I would think that Joe Kennedy would be a natural get to kind of come on this show. I think that could be a good interview. I think that there are some other big names that I'd be interested in getting on the show. And I think that the longer we're around and the more established the reputation of the Kirk Minahan show is, the easier it'll be to get some guests on. Because, initially in like the first, 3 months of the show, when you say, hey, would you like to be a guest on the Kirk Minahan show? They're going to say, the what? But hopefully now, more people have heard of it. More people have heard of Kirk, and maybe the Barstool stigma isn't working against us as powerfully as it has in the past. I don't know.
I mean, that's why we have you on right now.
Why is that?
That's true.
Well, to get us attention.
Yes,
like
they're
you just said.
excited. Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just fucking with you.
It's all about the clout.
Millions of people are going to tune into this just to hear
yeah.
about the life story of Big Steve.
Of course they will. I mean,
All right, Pat, any questions?
Steve, speaking of going back to the DMs for a second, again, to your credit, you have dealt with about 1.5 billion of my stupid ass DMs. But in the meantime, we've had some good conversations, I think, on the side, religion, politics, etc. So I think you and I are actually pretty similar, 5'7", overweight. We're pretty much twins, right? And one of the things that I always say is that I do feel that my religious convictions have really, in a lot of different ways, molded me to the person that I am today, and have played a huge role in my career, in my success. And, even to varying degrees of how observant one is with religion. I was wondering, if you had any thoughts on whether you think that your belief structure and the way that you feel about life and, afterlife, and just the model that you live your life by, if you think that has had any impact on you.
Yeah, of course it has. I mean, yeah, obviously it has. I think, I was like raised in, I think, a Methodist family, and we kind of went to church here and there, but really didn't much after I was like 5 or 6, just kind of stopped going to church. And then I kind of came back to the faith when I was at college, and I joined the Bowdoin Christian Fellowship. And so I think, yeah, it's always there. I mean, for me, it's always been more of like, I guess it started out more of as an academic, like an exercise in understanding the history of the world, basically. It's where it started for me. And then I read more of the Bible, and obviously it informs my own personal decisions, what I want to do with my life, how I treat other people, how I look to be treated. Like my understanding of human nature and what human nature is largely informed by, the Christian faith. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's been a huge part in shaping, I guess, the way I see the world and the way I want to conduct myself. But I also think that I haven't, if I'm being honest, haven't been the best Christian, like going to church and stuff. And I haven't really found a church that really speaks to me. And there are times when I'm like, oh, I appreciate the academic rigor and seriousness of Catholicism. But then there's the whole pederasty stuff. And can you join the Catholic Church?
I mean, listen, it's like that in every religion, in every organization.
Yeah. I mean, every organization has this problem. I mean, I've been in evangelical churches that have.
Well, you have 2, right, in the office.
Yeah, exactly.
You have 2 in the office, right?
Exactly. I mean, honestly, LK, I would need you here to translate for me.
Some translation.
I don't do any English there, but yeah, I mean, I've thought about, I would like to find a church, but I don't know. It hasn't been like a overwhelming, compelling thing for me. I guess I've been kind of, I guess, a quiet Christian. They say, I think I forget what part of the Bible it's in. You probably know better than me, Adam, but beware of the people who pray loudly and who make these very obvious flaunting of their, religious piety. And so I've just kind of been kind of quiet about it and really keep it to myself. I mean, Kirk and I will have it out from time to time because he, every once in a while he wants to pick at it, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else I can say on it.
All right.
I mean, you seem like one of those guys who has like a really, really nice hi-fi setup and doesn't talk about it, or has like a super weird hobby. You got which one? Which one is it?
What's hi-fi?
Well, I mean, okay, so you don't have fancy speakers and equipment.
No. I'm not like a big music guy.
It's like you 50-50. You produce.
Yeah. No, I bet.
I took a shot.
I don't think I have any really weird hobbies. I mean, I really like to go camping. I like to get away from the city as much as I possibly can. Like if it wasn't for the job situation over the last few years, I would not want to live in Boston. It's just too expensive and there's too many people. I'd like to just be out in the suburbs or out somewhere very rural. Someday just live off the fucking grid. I mean, in terms of hobbies, I don't know. I've got a coin collection.
Hey, so speaking of hobbies,
okay, you'll like you'll like what you saw earlier if you actually watch this episode.
Okay,
there we go.
So speaking of hobbies, you seem to like to travel a lot, right? So what's in your bucket list in terms of traveling?
On my bucket list, so I've been to Guatemala and we did Europe last summer. So I think next for us is like Southeast Asia. I think we'd like to do Vietnam. But one thing my wife and I do is we visit volcanoes. So we're trying to kind of like plot our trip. So we saw El Fuego in Guatemala. Yeah, little product placement there for you.
Thanks, Steve.
We saw Vesuvius and Etna when we were in Italy, and so I think we might try to. I don't know. I think we got a little South Asia trip planned for us. And obviously, I mean, I've been to Moscow numerous times.
Yeah, straight to
Right.
Already checked off the list.
For my honeymoon, we went to the Greek islands and we saw the volcano off of Santorini. And then for my wife's 30th, we did actually the Amalfi Coast also and did Vesuvius. Steve, I just want to before we run out of time, I really just want to give you an opportunity here. And this is going to be the first time I think publicly you've had this opportunity. Do you want to formally disavow Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, as well as declare your love for the Jews?
I formally disavow Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, and I declare my undying love for God's chosen people, the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, and all of Judah.
Well done.
That's
well
great.
done.
All right. Well, as
You're my number one. You're my number one Jew.
That's true.
Hey,
that is true.
I'll tell you though, I never met a Jewish person until I went to Bowdoin.
Really?
I went to an overnight summer camp in New Hampshire. Obviously,
I mean, you gotta ask people when you meet them if they're Jewish or not. Like, you know.
Well, no, but
I mean, sometimes you could tell the yarmulkes, obviously, yeah, but
no, there just aren't. There were no Jewish families in Dexter. There just weren't. Like in northern Maine, I think Maine's like it's like 1.1% Jewish, and they're all in southern Maine.
Yeah, there's a huge population in Bangor.
Oh, there is a population in Bangor?
Yeah, there's a huge population in Bangor. I actually know a number of friends of mine from high school. What they would do is they would stay and board in Massachusetts and go to the same schools that I went to. So there's a solid community there. But in New Hampshire once, up by the New Hampshire-Maine border, actually, someone once asked me, and it was not in a anti-Semitic or derogatory way. I've had that too, but this was just a normal question. Is that on your head to cover up your horns? So it doesn't surprise me that living in Maine that you haven't met many Jews.
All right, so
if you want to get into the history of it, what happened was the second revival of the Klan in the early 1900s was big in Maine, and there obviously weren't a lot of black people in Maine.
Yep.
But what they took out their xenophobia or their nativism on was French Canadians. So there was a famine in Quebec, and a lot of French Canadians were coming down into Maine in search of jobs and food, and they were Catholic and they didn't speak English. So you had this kind of this outsider coming down to take factory jobs and everything. And the white Protestants in Maine didn't like that. So the Klan kind of got together to basically go burn down Catholic churches and get rid of the French Canadians. And a lot of them ended up saying, fuck Maine, we're going to go down to New Orleans. And that's where Acadians come from. And it just also happened to be that they would hate basically anybody who wasn't white and Protestant. And so if you're trying to find a new place to live and you're a Catholic or you're Jewish, do you want to go live where all these guys in hoods are like burning churches and synagogues down? Probably not.
So guys,
Sous
Chef LK here taking over the kitchen. We don't want to take much more of your time, Steve. So any closing words before we let you go?
No, just go listen to the show today. We had a great show. I think we've got a great initiative. I think the Mina family is going to come together to help out John, and we've got some eBay auction items up that people will be able to bid for a chance on. Actually, LK, there's one that's going to be of interest to you. We're making available an opportunity to be a part of the Wilbur Show. So you will have
all right, that's mine.
Part of the Wilbur Show, but you're going to be the highest bidder on the item over at eBay. We tweeted out all those links. We tweeted out the GoFundMe if people want to help out there. And I think we've got some other surprises that Kirk alluded to today during the show that people will be interested in. Some opportunities for the Mina fans for sure. I'm
gonna go Portnoy on this then.
There you go.
All right, Steve. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Okay, have a good one.
Bye-bye.